I was at a conference and I was wandering around before it was my turn to speak. And you know what conferences are like. It was a third day and just people are it's just so bored because they're just having the same conversations over and over again with people. Where are you from? Or who are you with? Where are you based? Right?
Yeah, of course.
Any variation, any surprise, they will love you and it will make you memorable. And a woman asked me, "Oh, where'd you get I had a bottle of water with me." And she said, "Oh, where'd you get that water?" And I said, "Oh, that's not water. It's gin." And and she laughed, which is connection, right? That's an involuntary response. That's emotion. You have conjured emotion in a stranger. And then she surprised me and she said, "Even better." But
Amazing.
But think about that transformation. That's it. That's all it was. I could have said it's over there and the line is ridiculous. And by the way, the water was $8 because they just it's the Mandalay Bay Hotel and it's extortionate. But it opened it up and all of a sudden it brought her guard down. And now we're just two people talking. And how memorable does that make you also? Because when I go to follow up, did you ever get that G&T you needed on Thursday? She's going to remember. So sometimes the element of surprise is just pleasure where you didn't expect it.
Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Beth, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Today we're going to talk about the power of humor in business presentations and business communication in general. And again, congratulations for being nominated, I think once again, for at the Speaker Awards for, if I remember well, two categories, Booker's Choice and Best Live Speaker. Is that correct?
Yeah, go on. Yes. And I won for best show reel last year, which was very, very flattering. Not something you really throw onto the website, but we got to get Sherman. She's got the best show reel. But it was very flattering. And I would say that all the nominations and the attention, it's kind of a case study for humor being something that makes people sit up and notice.
Nice, nice. Congratulations again. And talking about humor, now I heard you say, Beth, that you think that humor is an essential tool in business. Why do you think it's essential? Why is it so important?
Because it's connection. It's pure connection. If someone, we all prefer to be around someone who can make us laugh or smile. And also, when I talk about humor, now my background is I'm a professional comedian and I've been a comedy writer for American TV shows for 30 years. So I come from a purely comedy background. But the reason humor works is because it's pure emotional connection. So in business presentations, if you can't engage your audience, then nothing else you do really matters. If they're connecting with people on LinkedIn, all the time and effort you put into curating your content, writing your content, and practicing your delivery, it's all sort of gone. And I do make the distinction that I use the word humor, but if that makes you squirrely, if people go, "Oh, I'm not funny," replace the word humor then with humanity or relatability, because really that's all it is. It's the ability to find common ground quickly. And it's to build trust and rapport, to get people to build trust so that people take the action of continuing to listen to you. And sometimes that's building enough so they listen to you all the way through. Sometimes it's just getting them to listen to you for another 30 seconds and another and another. And comedians are really good at building trust and rapport quickly. We have to establish an emotional connection with our audience pretty much immediately because otherwise it gets ugly. And in fact, it's so important in stand-up that failing to establish that connection isn't called failing, it's called dying, just literally called dying on stage. weirdly doing very well, is called Killing. I'm not sure why it's so violent. We're peaceful people. But it's engagement. So it doesn't matter how much effort you've put into things. If your audience, if you can't get your audience interested or excited, or simply get them to give you their attention, why are you doing it?
Yeah, yeah. So many benefits. And because you mentioned your background as a comedian, just out of curiosity, this is just a personal curiosity. Do you have any stand-up comedians who you really like and enjoy watching?
All sorts. I would say off the top of my head, I mean, the people that really make me laugh, Wanda Sykes. She's an American comedian. She does a lot of sitcoms, so people seem to know her more from that now. But as a stand-up, she's fantastic. Jim Gaffigan, this American comedian who really makes me laugh. Just really, really funny. And also, I think a great example of what is in comedy called clean comedy, in the sense that he doesn't use swear words, but it's absolutely possible to talk about sex, to talk about things that have a whiff of controversy without, in a way that doesn't use profanity. So it's not comedy for children. It's absolutely relatable, and he acknowledges all sorts of things that are that could be. I'm trying not to say the word controversial again. This is what happens when you get me before lunch. The blood sugar drops and the words get further away. But it's absolutely possible to make people laugh without it feeling naughty.
Yeah, no,
And I think in business, that's particularly something, because people worry that they're going to say something wrong, or they worry that they're going to wander into territory that's inappropriate.
Yeah, I totally understand. I was thinking about, for example, you watch shows from like people like Louis C.K., or in the UK we've got Ricky Gervais, and whether we like them or not, but uh, it's not clean. The language they use for sure
Mhm.
is not clean. And from your perspective, Beth, do you have a particular process that you follow that allows you to turn an idea or an observation, something that happens to you, into something funny that you can use in a presentation, or in business communication in general? Is there a process that you follow?
Well, you used an important word. You used the word observation. And when I talk about how people can find that sort of humor that connects, it really, you don't need, to me, and I say this as someone who was professionally funny for 3 decades, you don't need puns, you don't need clever, you don't need jokes, or jokes sort of in air quotes there. You just need truth. All comedians do is observe and report truth. Life is absurd. People are bonkers. All you have to do is observe and report truth. And what, when I work with speakers, I try to reframe it in terms of not, don't try to add jokes, add truth. And so process-wise, I come in as the last step, or one of the towards the end of the process. So humor, again, I talk about humor as seasoning. So it's not the main ingredient, it's seasoning. If you think of it like salt, not everything needs a lot, but everything needs some. And the drier your material is, or your subject is, or the less comfortable you are with things, a little bit goes a long way. So if you think about a few flakes of sea salt on chocolate, it's transformative. Too much, it's just weird. So it does have to be in balance, but you can use a little bit of salt and make something amazing, or you can, when I speak, because it's where I'm comfortable, I have a lot of seasoning. It's movie theater popcorn. But it has to be authentic to who you are, And it also has to be organic to the content. So jokes, every part of your presentation is there for a reason, right? The non-funny parts, right? All of it is there. You've done 6 revisions of it. Everything that's in there is there for a reason. It's the same way with humor. There is a function to it. Often the function is telling people who you are or how you see things, or telling them that you're vulnerable or easy to work with or resilient. Humor is a great way to say things between the lines. I sometimes describe it as a love language, right? It's a way to say things that you couldn't or wouldn't say directly. So if you're looking at your talk, well, at the beginning, you want to let people know something about yourself. And maybe what you want to let them know is that you know what they're thinking. And you don't have to use those words. But if you, I mean, in stand-up, often I would get up on stage and I would not look like the people in the audience. I'm small. I have short hair. I was from a big city and I was touring all over the US. And if you profiled me, you'd probably be right. And I was very different. But you come on stage and you have to acknowledge those things in a way that creates connection, but you're acknowledging them to remove them as potential distractions. You know, if someone is really, really tall, or you've got your arm in a sling, or the boss just got fired and you now have to speak at the conference, that's an elephant in the room. So it's not just acknowledging it for a laugh, you're acknowledging it to remove it as a potential distraction. That's important. And that's self-awareness. And when I talk about how truth is funny, there's 2 kinds of truth in particular that comedians go to a lot, and that's self-awareness and specificity. So self-awareness is, again, it's just simply acknowledging whatever your audience might be thinking. But think about what that does also. If you are acknowledging what's in that thought bubble above the audience's head, well, that's connection, right? Oh, she knows what I'm thinking. And again, I've learned to be clear about this. You don't have to actually say, I know what you're thinking. Because I've seen people come back at me and go, here's what I did. And I go, well, you don't have to actually say the first part. I points for being obedient, but now let's make it a little more subtle. But in terms of how I approach things, it's the last step. It's seasoning. So it's sort of, if you're cooking something, you're Italian, or if I've profiled your name, so I will assume you're Italian.
I am.
It's the spoon. It's someone who cares about you saying, taste this, taking the spoon and saying, taste this. What does it need?
Yeah. And so seasoning, and I will have a follow-up question for that. But you also mentioned that there are two things you go to when it comes to finding truths. One is self-awareness, and the other one is specificity. Can you tell me more
Yes,
about specificity?
sure. And I would also add a third S just to spit all over my microphone, but the element of surprise.
Right.
So it's specificity. So if I tell you, well, it's sort of storytelling. So think of it as storytelling, but just with a bit of humor seasoning on it. But you'll get to know more. It makes the storytelling more visceral. So what did you have for breakfast this morning?
I had yogurt with, do you say granola? Granola in English,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yogurt, banana, and granola. Yeah.
Okay. Well, sometimes I have yogurt and granola. Well, yesterday I went to have yogurt and granola, but I didn't have any yogurt left. So I used milk. So I put the granola in milk, but I did get the proportions wrong. So then I just had very wet granola. I wanted to add some fruit, but we didn't have any fruit. I thought we had some strawberries left. Turned out my wife had eaten them. So I used some strawberry jam and mixed that in. So then I just had this weird, wet, chunky stew. But then I made it. It was a terrible idea, but I made it, and then I ate it anyway because I just couldn't be bothered to eat anything else and I was late. So what do those details tell you about me, aside from my capacity to eat things with bad texture? Um, if truth is funny, then details are hilarious, and if not hilarious, telling. But so the details of what I had for breakfast, it's more truth and it's more vulnerability, and you could argue more resilience. Um, if you are talking about, if you're telling the story of how you, um, the story of really when your attitude changed and you decided this sort of work is not for me anymore, I'm going to turn and push my life in this direction now. Well, so I quit my job and I opened a business that did blank. Because a lot of those stories with professional speakers, it's, I sort of had it up to here and then I changed and now I'm doing this. Well, can you give us more detail? Okay, you quit your job. What did your partner say? What did your boss say when you quit? How did you quit? What did you do an hour after you quit? What did your, well, just give us some more details. They're telling. It's a form of storytelling on rocket fuel.
Do you think, Beth, that there's a fine balance between adding those details to bring the story to life, while at the same time not giving too many details to make it boring? Is there a fine line there?
Well, to make it boring or to have it be a too much of a tangent. Absolutely. Of course, there's a tipping point. But I'm talking about things sort of if it's the creative process of, okay, now I've got my message honed. I know what my message is. Now let me add a little more seasoning. Bit of it is trial and error. So it's sort of put it in, and yeah, maybe you don't need, maybe you only just need a tiny bit. But the only way to know and to know what the best stuff is to put it in and then read it through again. So it's sort of add everything or add all the things you think you might want and then trim the fat, edit it down, edit it down, edit it down. The same way you process that you use with your content.
Yeah, because it's I think this is connected to what you said before, that it is seasoning, which means that the the most important thing, or I'm thinking about a talk, a presentation, the most important thing is, and please correct me if I'm wrong from your perspective, the
Mhm.
most important thing is your message, the core message, your idea. We add humor to bring the message to life, to make it relatable, to make it memorable. So we want to be able to do that, to include humor without distracting from the core message. What do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, we're adding humanity. I'm calling it humor because that's the perspective, that's my area of expertise. But again, I don't want people to add jokes. I want them to add truth and I want them to add humanity. But like any seasoning, it has to be appropriate to the content and there's a balance, but that balance is different. I think it's different for every talk and every audience. If you're giving a talk at 9 in the morning, you might choose, you might have a different hand with your seasoning than you would if it's an after dinner talk.
Because you said appropriate, so that tells me that the so we need to be mindful of when it's appropriate. That there's a time and a place for humor as well. What are your thoughts on this?
There's a time and a time and a place for humor. I think it's always the time and the place for humor, again, because I'm putting it under the label of humanity. So I have worked on, well, I've helped people with eulogies. I've helped people with I mean, talks that would just rip your heart out of your chest. And I think because something that humor does very, very well is relieves tension. And I've worked with a lot of keynote speakers who talk about their battle with cancer or losing a loved one or their military experience that was traumatic. And adding humor, you're not making light of the subject. You're adding truth that relieves a little bit of the tension so that both the speaker and the audience can maybe catch their breath for a second. And also because that's what life is. Life, at our darkest moments, often we laugh to cope. And I've sort of, at a fairly dark time in my life, it's the ability to sort of zoom out and have that perspective and to see the absurdity and the truth of a situation. And particularly, a not great period in my life. My parents passed very close together, and they were much older, and was kind of for the best, as well as those things can be. But as the daughter and the person who had to do all of the paperwork and everything, I spent most of one summer in Los Angeles, sitting in my office with the window open because lovely weather, calling insurance companies, banks, all sorts of people, and having to shout things like "report a death" into the phone prompt over and over and over again. And I made myself, because one passed and you had to do all that stuff, and Social Security and the government. There's a million calls you have to do. And then the other one passed. And I got to do them all over again. And all I could think was, I wonder what the neighbors think. Because I just realized at some point, what's happening at the Sherman house? How many people are buried under those floorboards? So it's not always inappropriate. Sometimes it's just a matter of seeing things at a slightly different angle. And if you're telling a story that's very heavy, it can keep the audience engaged. Because also everyone in the audience has their own issues and trauma. And you don't necessarily, you want them to understand your point, but you don't want them to get lost in the emotion of it.
Yeah.
Because there are some subjects that are just unrelentingly grim. So what can you add? What human truth happened in this story or after this story that will let everyone feel like, like life is worth living.
And
There's some hope.
I like the word you use, tension, relieving tension, which makes me think that this is not just useful for like big speaking engagements, but also in day-to-day business communication. I was thinking, Beth, maybe you need to share feedback, which is, don't want to say negative feedback, but maybe it's a performance review. You need to share feedback with your direct reports, or you need to deal with conflict in a business meeting. I guess there's a place there for, and of course you need to be able to do it well. But if you do it well, even in those difficult business situations, that can help relieve tension. What do you think?
Yes, of course. And again, it has to be authentic to you, but I think bringing someone into your office with, it wasn't your best day. I think it's what you say and how you say it. But again, humor is it's a love language. It's a way to say things between the lines. Sometimes what we're saying is, I'm desperately trying to give you the benefit of the doubt, or we both know what happened, but I think a lot of you, so I'm not just going to throw a stapler at your head. Or you're an adult, you know what just happened. I know what just happened. Wasn't your best day. It says a lot. And if you're a leader, leading by example, when something doesn't go well, or someone above you changes the plan yet again, and all that work that everybody just put in suddenly is pointless or feels pointless, saying, well, that was, I think that's exactly what we hoped would happen. I mean, sometimes just maybe saying the opposite of what you're thinking, but saying it with a smile on your face and saying it just to relieve enough tension. Don't be, uh, well, whichever version of the Office character you prefer, the US or the UK, but don't be, have the self-awareness. You're not trying to do a stand-up thing. You're not trying to make everybody laugh. Hey, you're just acknowledging the elephant in the room and saying between the lines, I saw that too. That just happened.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's enough because how many times I know it's happened to me, been sitting in a meeting, uh, it happened all the time in TV because we would get network notes and all of a sudden everything we had done would change. But if you're a leader and you're in a meeting and you have to give some direction that is possibly completely 180 from what the direction was before, or you have to pass on a direction that is really not smart, but you are the middleman, and you can't sabotage. It would be unprofessional to explicitly say this is the dumbest idea anyone's ever had that the president of the company just had. You can't say that, but you can say, well, we're going in a new direction, and I know you're all as excited as I am. And then just go. Sometimes it's just a small thing, but think about what you're saying between the lines is, yes, I know this might not be a great idea either, but we all have to put our heads down and just kind of get through it together. Because otherwise, what people are thinking is what I was thinking was, this is 180 degrees from what they just told us to do. Am I insane? Wait a minute. This is the exact opposite of what they told us they wanted 2 days ago. And by the way, we were all here till 10 last night working on this. But at least it's an acknowledgement, and you're making people feel seen and heard.
Are you
So
doing it? You're doing it in a light way as well.
yeah, because it's not you don't want to undermine people, but I think you can acknowledge all people want. The people want to be seen and heard, and they want. We can't necessarily control what happens. We can't always control it, but we can control our reaction to it. And I think a big part of leadership is leading by example. And without saying, we are resilient, you can show that you're resilient. You can show that, okay, this is going to be harder than it needs to be, but we're going to get through it together. I think that's powerful.
Before we continue with this episode, I just want to share a few resources that I think will be super useful for you. The first one is check out either my book, Confident Presenter, or my colleague Phil Wakenall's book, Business Presentation Revolution, or both. These are books for business owners and leaders who want to take their presentation skills to a higher level. To make the most of the books, take the Confident Presenter Scorecard, which is an online tool that allows you to assess your presentation skills for free in less than 3 minutes. And then also, at the moment, I'm running a series of free presentation skills web classes, and I'd love to see you there. The links are in the show notes. Now let's go back to the episode. Yeah. And instead, Beth, what do you have any suggestions or recommendations when it comes to, say, for example, that you're giving a talk and you've prepared your talk and you've also included some seasoning, you've got some humor, and then you give it a try and it doesn't work. It goes wrong for some reason. What would you do there as a speaker? Any suggestions?
Sure. And I would also say, look, if all you're doing is adding truth, you're adding details, you're adding a little bit of story, you're telling people a little something about yourself, there's less chance it will go wrong. It's not a dad joke where you're just going to get groans and eye rolls. If you say, well, then I got fired, and that was a long, tense conversation with my wife. So if you often, so if it doesn't go, if first of all, if it doesn't get something, just keep going. The expectation, this is not stand-up comedy. In stand-up comedy, people come and there's an expectation that someone's going to make them laugh. In professional speaking, your audience doesn't have that expectation. So they're not listening for it. So one of the things that you can do is make sure your delivery lets people know you've just said something. And sometimes that just means a smile or turning your head or sort of directing what you're saying, but somehow giving the audience a cue without being a clown about it, but giving your audience a cue that what you're saying is you're editorializing or you're adding, this is seasoning. Because often people read it in the same very earnest voice that they're using for their other content, and it just goes by. If you, so it often works. So usually it's more of less a problem of really pissing people off. Now, if you do piss people off, if you've used something and you've offended people, I mean, sometimes, I mean, I wouldn't recommend using anything that's risky, but if you use something and people sort of, you can tell there's a shift in the energy, then acknowledge it and say, that didn't come out right. I mean, look, I've been guilty of that. A joke, again, I'm using the word joke, but something falls out of your mouth in the moment and you've forgotten where you were for a minute.
Do you remember
Own it.
anything? You don't have to, but just in case, do you remember anything in particular that when it went wrong for you?
In not in speaking in the corporate world. My biggest problem as a woman of a certain age, speaking now, is that my memory is not what it used to be, and it didn't used to be that good. um, so really, between ADHD and menopause, it's amazing I ever have a complete thought. So, but I will say in stand-ups, look, sometimes you take a swing and it doesn't work, but that's how we learn. And something that I always suggest speakers do, it's a comedian thing. You'll see every comedian records every set. Every time we go on stage, we record it. And if you're speaking, whatever level you are, record yourself. And it doesn't have to be a video. It can just be the voice note on your phone, but record yourself so that when you think, I thought that line would get something, or I thought there would be some sort of reaction, then you can listen back and you can tell, then you can start diagnosing what didn't work. Because often your instinct that something was funny or entertaining or human and would get connection, often that instinct is correct. But when you listen back, you'll hear, oh, or what I see in my clients a lot is I have to say, you swallowed the punchline. They didn't fully commit to the punchline. And again, you don't have to be a clown about it, but in comedy, the last word of the sentence is the last word of the joke is the most important word of the joke. I mean, that's what should be your last word, because that's what the ear will hear the clearest. And sometimes people, it can be the writing where they haven't written the line in a way that really pops, or it can be the delivery where they've just sort of glossed over it and then, on to the next thing. And then, you can step on your own laugh and you can sometimes hear that. You can hear either, oh, that wasn't clear, it didn't sound like a joke, or you can hear, oh, people were just starting to go, and then you were talking about something else and they wanted to hear that. So we don't want to be rude. We're not going to laugh.
Yeah.
So There are a lot of things that can do it that can cause something not to get a reaction. Something else that I find causes content not to get much of a reaction is your audience is British. Uh, that's been a learning curve. I am American. I live in London. I work in the US. I do a lot of keynoting in the US, but I also do quite a bit in the UK. Whew, yeah. And I say this when it happens. That's the difference. Is the thing about the English. Love humor, hate laughing. There is very much. I come from a. Well, you're Italian. I have to tell you, I come from a demonstrative culture where if we like something, you know it. And the number of times I really had to get used to being in the UK, and people will sort of smile and nod, and then afterwards say, "Oh my God, that was so funny." You go, well,
Why didn't
really?
you show
Because
me?
I thought I died. But what I've realized is that here you just have to point it out. And once you point it out, going, oh, okay, love humor, hate laughing. Oh, they love that. That's what gets a response. And then that's something that I can sort of point out because there are things that I know because I've done them in front of lots of audiences, usually get a reaction. I mean, it's a process of, it's like a magic trick. You go, well, this works. I know this works.
Yeah.
Or I know this usually gets something.
You see, I
And
saw that I experienced that as an audience member with I don't know if you know Guy Kawasaki. At the moment, he's the chief evangelist of Canva, the graphic design platform. He worked at Apple, and he's got lots of content online, and you can see, especially online, he's American as well. He likes to include a lot of humor in his talks and presentations, and people laugh. And then he went to the UK, came to the UK, and I went there to watch the talk. And the same, I knew the jokes or
Mhm.
the humanity, as you call it. I knew them, and I've seen it. I had seen in the past that those elements worked in all the other contexts, but in the UK, most people didn't laugh.
Yeah. And as the person up on stage, it's an adjustment. And I'm someone because I now speak about humor as a tool, but I come to it as a speak about humor as a tool. I'm not calling myself a tool. I speak about how to use humor as a tool. um, the Americans will enjoy that one. Um, tool is what you would call someone who's yeah, not particularly
All right.
bright.
Okay.
Um, also,
But
humor
with me, Beth, that's an extra challenge for you because
culturally specific.
yeah, but also, I speak and I hear English as a second language, so I don't know all the nuances. So you have an extra challenge here.
Well, but that's fine because and it just becomes self-awareness because I said it, didn't get anything, and then realized it, and then just acknowledged it. I was human. Oh, wait, oh, that's probably why that happened. And then it worked. I mean, sometimes also, by the way, when something doesn't work, maybe your audience just doesn't have enough information. So sometimes it's just providing a little bit more information so that everyone gets it. Um, Now I've totally lost the thread
No,
of what I
that's
was
that
talking
that's
about.
I did want to go back to something you said some time ago. You said that there are three, you mentioned three S's:
Yes.
self-awareness,
Self-awareness, specificity.
specificity, and surprise.
Yes.
Tell me more about surprise.
Well, it's that's all comedy is really the element of surprise. You expect one thing to happen, something else does. I mean, it's the classic guy walks down the street, you think he's going to be just fine, he slips on a banana peel. Also violent, but it's the element of surprise. It's just a punchline is a surprise at the end of a sentence. That's it. It's and even when you know it's coming, when someone tells you an actual, a joke, we know it's coming, and we're even happier when it's not the thing we thought it would be. We enjoy that surprise. So if you're speaking in a business context and someone expects it to be, I mean, let's face it, most of the people who come to our talks are not there of their own free will. They're there because it's a work thing or it's a coin flip at a conference. this breakout session or that breakout session. No one's at home thinking, "Ooh, 2 more sleeps until trends in facilities management." Um, and I'm not saying they don't want to be there, but it's just they don't. They're not really expecting to enjoy themselves. So when we talk about seasoning, it's that little pop of color. So if they are pleasantly surprised by the fact that, oh, the speaker is, well, sometimes the surprise is they're prepared. But if the speaker is warm, human, engaging, honest, vulnerable, or has shared something, a little detail that makes them laugh or smile and makes them, has created emotional connection. We're not necessarily expecting that. So just that surprise. It's also a great tool in networking, the element of surprise. And I talk about this because it's true. I was at a conference and I was wandering around before it was my turn to speak. And you know what conferences are like. It was a third day, and just people are just so bored because they're just having the same conversations over and over again with people. Where are you from? Or who are you with? Where are you based? Right?
Yeah, of course.
Any variation, any surprise, they will love you and it will make you memorable. And a woman asked me, "Oh, where'd you get that?" I had a bottle of water with me, and she said, "Oh, where'd you get that water?" And I said, "Oh, that's not water. It's gin." And and she laughed, which is connection, right? That's an involuntary response. That's emotion. You have conjured emotion in a stranger. And then she surprised me and she said, "Even better."
Amazing.
But
Yeah.
but think about that transformation. That's it. That's all it was. I could have said it's over there and the line is ridiculous. And by the way, the water was $8 because it's the Mandalay Bay Hotel and it's extortionate. But it opened it up, and all of a sudden it brought her guard down, and now we're just two people talking. And how memorable does that make you also? Because when I go to follow up, did you ever get that G&T you needed on Thursday? She's going to remember. So sometimes the element of surprise is just pleasure where you didn't expect it. It's the, mint on your pillow, or someone comes in, "Hey, there's cake in the conference room." You go, "Oh, well, great."
It's unexpected. Yeah.
It's unexpected.
And Beth, if someone comes to you and they say, or maybe they've listened to this conversation and they think, I get it. Humor is an essential tool in communication. It makes a lot of sense. Seasoning and humanity and real life truths, all of these things, they agree with it. And they say, Beth, but you know what? You can do it because you are funny. I'm just not funny. What would you respond to that?
You don't have to be funny to use humor. You don't. Because again, truth is funny. It does the work for you. It's observe and report. So I would say that every single person, and I have a lot of people say, "I'm not funny." Again, to be clear, they're saying that about themselves. They say that about me. It's awkward. Um, but I say, "Have you ever made your partner laugh?"
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you have kids? You ever made your kids laugh? When you go out for a drink with friends, you ever made your friends laugh? And you don't have to be the class clown or the life of the party, but the people that are close to you, the people that you have relationships with, like emotional relationships with, your good friends, the people in your life, your family, do you make them smile? Yeah. And how are you doing that? You're not doing stand up. You're not telling jokes. You're being yourself. It's authenticity, it's vulnerability, and it's truth and attitude.
Yeah, yeah. And what about, we talked about before the line between adding enough details to bring the story to life and not doing it too much, not too many details. Is there also another line between when you use humor, you want, on the one hand, you want to be perceived as funny, you want to be seen, oh, I don't know if you want that, but the humor has to work. but you don't want to be perceived as trying too hard to be funny. Have you ever seen situations where it's clear that the speaker is obviously trying too hard to be funny?
Yeah, no, I actually say stop trying to be funny. Don't try to be funny because it's diminishing returns. And it's the same thing for a comedian. If you go out on stage, it's a weird kind of trap, catch 22. If people think that you're trying too hard, they hold it against you. But it's about authenticity. So the important thing about anything that you use, it has to be authentic to you and organic to the material. And it has to contribute something. So I would say don't, we're adding truth. We're not trying to add jokes. And oh man, I had such a good thought chambered and it
It's okay.
disappeared.
It's okay.
Well,
Oh,
it's that when if you go up and you try to be funny, you are trying to be something other than yourself. And all people want in a speaker, they want the information that you have. If you're speaking, you are probably a subject matter expert by whatever definition you would use in that situation. And they want that delivered in a way that keeps them engaged. So when clients come to me and they say, I want to be funny, and go, no, you don't. Really what they want is they don't want to be boring.
mm,
And I think that's a really important distinction. They don't want to be boring because that's what people's fears are. Because we've all sat through, and it's because of our own personal experiences. We've all sat through presentations that were just boring. And by boring, I mean they didn't keep us engaged. And it also felt like maybe the speaker wasn't making the audience their priority. And by priority, I mean, you don't have to make us laugh, but make us feel connected to you, make us feel something that's not just contempt and judgment for you as the speaker. Make us think about our experience. If you were sitting in the audience, how would you want this explained to you? And sometimes those are just simple things. It's some of it is just people skills. It's make your audience feel nurtured, make your audience feel like you are present, make your audience feel like you like them and care about their experience.
yeah.
And humanity and authenticity, it's a way to do that. And that doesn't have to be, oh, I just flew in. Boy, are my arms tired. That doesn't do it.
In addition to that, you said don't try to be funny. Before you said don't use jokes. We're talking about using truths, funny truths, because truth is funny. Are there any other, and you don't have to have something else, but just in case, any other perhaps mistakes that you see people make when it comes to using humor in business communication?
Well, they try to force it, and that just doesn't work. One thing that particularly doesn't work in business presentations is they wonder why what they're saying isn't getting a reaction. And I'll say, okay, can I see your slides? And it's because they'll think that they've got, and maybe they do. We've worked on something and they're telling a story and it shows that they're vulnerable or they sort of, it just makes them human. But the slide that's up has 700 words. It's got a whole essay on it, or it's got a flow chart with 1,000 different numbers. And you go, well, it's because people can't do two things at once. They're not fully listening to you. So you're competing with yourself. And that's why it reduces the impact of anything you're saying. It reduces the impact of the humor or humanity, but it also reduces the impact of the actual information. People can't digest 20 things at the same time. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Either make that several slides or just, um, I want to say melt it all down, just boil it all down to what do they have to know? Or, you don't always need slides. I know
Exactly.
everyone loves PowerPoint, but I come from a stand-up background. I, Learning to use slides has been the most awkward thing. Really? I'm used to talking 40 minutes to people. We don't have slides. They don't give us slides. Uh, so maybe sometimes you do need slides, but see how few slides you can use. Because often people just think that they need to illustrate everything. But if I'm talking about the elephant in the room, do I always need a slide that has an elephant on it? And if I am going to use it, then I don't want it to just be a straight up illustration of it. Maybe I want it to provide more information. Maybe that's a comedic opportunity. It can be a particular elephant, or it can be I can find a nature photo of an elephant doing something untoward. I don't know, but I can find something more interesting, or again, it's intent. So everything you say doesn't have to be on a slide. Sometimes don't compete against yourself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we are 100% aligned from this perspective. You don't have to have something on the wall for everything you say. Slides in business presentations can be useful if we use them well. We want to keep them simple, visual. You are the presentation, not your slides. Your slides are there to support and reinforce and amplify your message. One slide, I think the most powerful and most effective slide in the world is a pure black slide that very few people use, and we encourage our clients to do that. From time to time, you've got your slide deck, you've got your PowerPoint. As you said, you've got something. You don't have to have something on the wall that reinforce it. You just click black slide, and then it works like magic. The audience's attention goes back to you and what you have to say.
Yeah, it's a spotlight. I mean, you're basically spotlighting yourself. If you want people to listen to you, don't split their focus.
Yeah, yeah.
And also don't get ahead of your slides, because I see people doing it if they do have something that's funny, or even not funny, just information on a slide. Say it first. Say it. Think of you're sort of throwing it out. They're feathers you're throwing out into the audience. Say it. Let them sort of loft down to earth, and then show them. It's reinforcement. But if you get ahead of them, you're not even at the end of your sentence again. And in humor, that's called the punchline. That's what we have at the end of our sentences. You're just sort of cutting it off.
And of course, to do that, you need to be, but that's a different conversation. You need to be prepared, which you have to be prepared as a speaker. Many people, again, I'm thinking about business owners, business leaders. They often, the reality is that they don't prepare, or they don't prepare enough, they don't rehearse. And so they use their PowerPoint as a crutch for them to remember what they have to say. They click, oh, I was supposed to say that. And then they say, and then they click, oh, now I was supposed to say that. But anyway, Beth, I also wanted to ask you, again, let's say that someone listens to this conversation and they say, you know what? Okay, I want to give it a try. I want to try and develop my sense of humor in my day-to-day business communication or business presentations. Is there, and again, if you don't have one thing in mind, that's fine, but is there one thing, one practical thing they can do today or after the episode for them to be able to implement some of the things that you've mentioned to develop their sense of humor in their communication?
Well, I'll give you two things. The first one sounds very obvious. It's smile. Just smile. It lowers people's guards, and it lets people know, it's a cue that it tells them something about you. It also lets them know that whatever you're saying, it's a non-creepy wink. It's a way to sort of let people know that you're open. And it sounds very obvious, but especially on stage or in networking events, you look around look at speakers or look around a networking event and look at how many people are smiling.
Very few.
Very few. It's surprising, but just be conscious of it. And look, it's something that I have to do, again, comedian. But I realized when I first started watching myself on stage, I thought, I look so serious. And I probably look serious in this podcast, but I always have to make an effort. I have to a conscious effort to smile, especially because I talk about humor and suddenly I look deadly serious if I'm not thinking about it, just because my brain and my face aren't always connected. So smile. I would also say if you're a speaker, create a note on your phone. And it's the story note, and a lot of people that talk about storytelling, because humor and storytelling, it's the same purpose, it's the same result. And I think humor is a way to really just boost storytelling. Storytelling is great. Storytelling with humor is transformational. So make a note on your phone for observations. What are things that you notice? So I do that myself all the time. Because if I sit down and think, what are my observations? Life is busy. I have a short attention span. I can't remember anything. I mean, I can maybe a few things, but if I write them down in the moment, I mean, it goes for case studies too. I work one-to-one with people all day long. And if you got to the end of the week and put a gun to my head, which would be an overreaction, but if you put a gun to my head, I don't think I could tell you half of the people that I worked with and what came up and examples of what we worked on in their talks. And these are people I'm spending 90 minutes a time with. I mean, thank God for Otter and AI note takers. So make notes. Just make notes to yourself of things that you observe or things that you think are absurd or silly or counterintuitive about life or your subject. Once you start noticing things, because that's what comedians do, we all carry around a notebook and we write things down. And the more you do it, the more you're going to get your antenna tuned into the sorts of things that just make you smile and make you go, yeah, that doesn't really make any sense. Write it down. And then when you sit down and you're looking for an example, some seasoning to add, you've got a place to start. You don't necessarily have to use that stuff, but there's nothing worse than sitting going, it's a blank page. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I've got nothing. You can do it with humor, as you said, you can do it with stories, you can do it with analogies. Analogies are another tool, very powerful tool in communication. Yeah. Okay, and again, you don't have to have an answer, but just in case, because it can be useful for our listeners, any book recommendations on the subject? Is there a particular book or some books that you would recommend for those who want to learn more about humor but if possible, particularly in business communication presentations?
I'm not, I was about to say I'm not a fan of books, and that doesn't come out right. I enjoy reading. I love reading. But to learn more about humor as a tool for communication, I would say watch stand-up. Watch Jim Gaffigan is a great example, and because he works clean, and again, it doesn't mean what he talks about is boring or thin, but he doesn't use profanity. And it's all very corporate friendly. I mean, if you want to know how to say things without say naughty things or have funny observations, watch Jim Gaffigan, watch Mike Birbiglia. Mike Birbiglia is a really, really good storyteller. He's a comedian, but he's also a really good storyteller. And a lot of his specials are on, we just watched one last night, and it was either Netflix or Amazon, but easily accessible. An American guy. So that's what I would say. And consume all the stand-up you can. Watch any stand-up you enjoy. Watch how they use self-awareness and specificity. Watch how they smile, because comedians, we love what we do. It's like watching a musician do what they do. Energy and enthusiasm is contagious. And
So
if you're
is
watching
boredom.
someone, so is boredom. But if the person you're watching is genuinely engaged with what they're saying, then it shows. So watch a ton of stand-up, watch how they craft the material. And when I talk about adding humor as a seasoning, I also, I think I left it out of this, but I talk about there's 3 places in every talk that do very well with seasoning. It's the beginning, the middle, and the end, which sounds super obvious, but the beginning, you set a tone and you tell people something about yourself. I mean, again, between the lines. In the middle, attention spans are short. So people are thinking about, maybe they're just thinking about lunch or wondering how many, as interesting as we are, if they start smelling lunch, their mind will wander. And the end, people remember, I mean, attention spans are short. And even if the middle of what you said maybe didn't have enough impact, if you leave with impact, and in comedy, it's called a callback. And you'll see it in every stand-up special you watch, every single one. It will be a callback to something that they referenced earlier. So I would say, I can't say don't read, but I would say the best thing you can do to learn about comedy is to consume as much comedy as you can. And I mean, as a homework assignment, it's a pretty good one.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm going to include the names that you mentioned in the show notes. You made me think about another question, which is based on what you've just said. You said the beginning, the middle, and the end. By any chance, do you have a rule of thumb in terms of, say, for example, that you have a 1 hour or a 30-minute presentation? And of course, I get it, it depends. It has to be organic to the material. It has to be authentic. It depends on the context, on the audience. But is there a rule of thumb that you tend to follow in terms of how many funny moments you include in a presentation? Like, for example, do you tend to do like one every 5 minutes, one every time? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Or there is no such rule.
Uh, to me, there's not a rule. There's not a right or a wrong. I would say look for where the opportunities are. So there are good at the beginning, people don't know you. You want to help them get to know you. In the middle, again, that's where minds tend to wander. So I tend to front load it with a little bit more humor at the beginning than I would have in the rest of it, because once you've set the tone, so you're sort of giving people an opportunity to learn a little something about you. Again, this is between the lines, and to set the tone of, I know this is about, forensic accounting, but it's not going to be as boring as you think. Again, between the lines, but you sort of go, oh, people are going to sit up and notice, or they're sort of tuned in and listening. But then there is the content that you simply have to deliver. So you don't want it to be a distraction. So if you have content that you're used to giving and you're comfortable giving, and you know that people really get value from it, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I tend to have a slightly heavier hand at the beginning. The middle is where this is your content, your content, this is what people came to hear. Break it up just a tiny bit in the middle, and then at the end, how can we bring everything full circle? Because that's really what a callback is. You're doing it with a laugh, but you're bringing everything full circle. So I don't think it's about numbers. I think it's simply about balance.
Understood. I guess, Beth, the answer would have been different if the context was not business communication, but in stand-up comedy. And this is perhaps even a little bit beyond the main theme of our podcast. But I'm just curious, for stand-up comedians, do you tend to follow a certain rule in terms of how many laughs you need to try and get during a show?
Well, in comedy writing, there's sort of laughs per page, but again, there's not a right or a wrong. In stand-up, comedy releases tension, and it's sort of more a comfort level and skill of the comedian. How much tension are you willing to build before you release it? And if it's your own comfort level. So if in stand up, I like immediate feedback. I am shallow, but I like immediate feedback. So I tend to sort of build it, get a laugh, build the tension, release it with a laugh, build the tension, release it with a laugh. Now I might go a couple of beats, but the more tension you build, the more pressure there is for the quality of that punchline. And I've got a story that I tell, not in stand-up, but on stage, about humor as a love language, and I learned it from my dad because that was really it was the only way he could relate to people. And then I've got a story, he had a stroke, and and there was something in particular that he said when he woke up from that, or when I realized that he was still inside. But it's a heavy story. We're talking about an old man who slipped in the tub and whacked his head, and he was unresponsive in the ambulance. That's a lot of tension for a comedian to deal with, and for an audience. So the punchline at the end of that better be worth it. That can't be a 5.
Yeah,
It's got to
yeah, yeah.
be, it's a big swing. So I think it's all relative.
Understand. Makes sense. And if someone wants to say hi and connect with you and learn more about you and your work, where should they go? Where do they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. It's Beth Sherman, and if you find me, please connect, say hello, tell me that you heard me on Andrea's podcast. You can also find me all the information on my speaking and master classes that I do, because I do quite a bit of work with corporations and in the corporate world, showing employees how to improve their communication. And that's also the cleverly named BethSherman.com. You don't get daytime Emmys for nothing. Yeah. Some of my best work.
And yeah, so we're going to include your LinkedIn profile and your website again in the show notes. And last thing, Beth, before we close, have I missed something? If you think about what we talked about today, the topic, the importance of humor as an essential tool in business communication, is there a question, for example, that you hoped I asked and I didn't ask? Have I missed something?
Well, people worry about getting it wrong. And I like to remind them that humor is a tool, just like a hammer is a tool. You can use a hammer to build something, or you can use a hammer to hurt someone. But sometimes that hurt is unintentional. I mean, have you ever hit your thumb with a hammer? I have. I didn't do it on purpose. So it can happen. But if you frame humor as a way to connect with people, if you frame it as a love language, and if you think of, if it's that truth is funny and what you're sharing is truthful and authentic to you, it's a lot harder to go wrong. And if you do, it's a lot easier to apologize from a place that's sincere, and it'll be heard. So that's what I'd like to leave people with. And also, I do have a newsletter. But if I could ask you to include that as well every Saturday, I send out something that's just very short and funny, hopefully like me, but has tips on how to use humor to improve communication, to make it more effective and engaging.
Of course, we'll include the newsletter as well. And by the way, I love the way you describe it, humor as a love language. That's a very nice description. And Beth, thank you very much. Congratulations again for the Speaker Awards. It's in, what is it now? Now it's we are recording this in May. The ceremony is in July, isn't it?
Yeah, mid-July, I think.
Mid-July. So I cheer for you, and I hope it goes well. And let's keep in touch. All the very best.
I appreciate it, and it's an honor just to be nominated.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.